I am both excited for the new Fable game and also incredibly worried. So Fable was an Xbox exclusive RPG series. The first game released all the way back in 2004 with two mainline sequels releasing in 2008 and 2011 respectively. The franchise was created by the somewhat controversial development team Lionhead Studios, who came to a bitter end in 2016 when the team, alongside the next Fable game, Fable Legends, closed down. Later down the line, Xbox regretted this closure, calling Lionhead's dismissal a misstep, showing a regret for the wasted potential of the team. Flash forward to today and Fable's being rebooted. We've seen a few trailers and got a general look at the game, and as stated, I am immensely excited for this reboot, but a few red flags are beginning to show. But I want to start positive today, as quite frankly there's a lot I'm looking forward to with this game. So, gameplay so far has been rather limited. I'd say altogether we've had maybe less than 5 minutes total? But from the looks of what we have had, I have to say, combat is looking pretty damn on point. We've been shown a fair amount of spells, including classics like the Fireball, but also some new ones like Levitation. What I am majorly loving about this so far is the pure fact it seems super fluid and incorporated into the combat systems. In prior Fable games, will use was able to be used super conveniently. You could toss a casual spell during combat with ease, and then even combine it with the hack and slash nature of the combat so that all attacks are kind of strung together. And so far, with what's been shown, it's clear they're going for a similar thing. As demonstrated with the Levitation, will use isn't just a single attack method, but is designed to be used with ranged weapons to maximize damage. And it appears that attacks like the mentioned Fireball will be used with melee combat at our own convenience. And so far, overall, it strikes me as the classic Fable combat system, which I'm really excited about. Here's hoping that they keep the XYB combat control scheme. I'm also in love with the time period they've chosen. To my untrained eye, if I had to guess, they've chosen a time period between Fable 1 and 2. However, it is possible that I am incorrect on that. We are yet to see any guns, which leads me to believe they may not actually have any in the game. Now, Fable 2 is my personal favourite game, with gunslinging being how I enjoy playing the game primarily. However, I actually don't mind the exclusion of guns, and I don't mind them setting the game in an older time period. One of Fable 2's biggest issues ended up being the massive time jump between Fable 1 and 2. They skipped too much too early and put themselves in a corner creatively due to this. Fable starting earlier means that if they decide to make a sequel down the line, the same error won't be a problem, as they'll have plenty of space to work with creatively. I don't know about you guys, but all this Fable talk sure has got me excited. Look what I have. Let's open it together. Son of a bitch! Well, this won't be a problem thanks to my new sponsor. I'm just kidding, don't worry. Now, one of my favourite things about the old Fable games has been the enemy selection and variety. Everything from Balverines to Hobbs to Banshees, this wide array of enemies is something I've fallen in love with over the years, and all the lore that surrounds them just made me love them even more. The Hobbs that kidnap children and turn them into more Hobbs, the Balverines that turn humans into more Balverines, and even more. I'm so happy to see many of the enemies I know and love return to Fable in the reboots. When I saw a Balverine for the first time in the new trailers, I was overjoyed. And then seeing Hobbs shortly after just affirmed me that these developers at Playground are treating this IP with at least some respect to what came before it. And the visual styles of the enemies are just so on point for me, seeing Balverines dripping with blood. It just reminded me of the leap forward in technology and that we will actually be able to execute some of Lionhead's older concepts, and their own concepts of course, with a level of detail and atmosphere that the early 360 titles simply wouldn't be able to. I can only hope to see even more enemies return, and I'm praying on the creepiest enemy Banshees being in the game, because I think they're horrifically awesome. Speaking of detail and atmosphere, I'm going to throw out a bit of a hot take here. The world design and atmosphere graphically is exactly how I would envision a modern day Fable game looking based on the earlier titles. Now, I'm not talking about character design here, that segment's going to be coming later. But the world itself has that lighting and that fantasy feel that just screams Fable, at least to me. I find this is showcased best in the architecture design of Bowerstone. Look at the buildings, that slightly abstract design, the slightly off or odd approach they've made here. It just reminds me so much of the Fable I know and love. Stepping outside the city, the forests, they look lush. The spooky areas look, well, spooky. I think so far the setting is perhaps what I'm sold the most on, and maybe I'm a little weird for this, but the world design just looks so enchanting to me, and I can't help but excite myself at the thought of exploring Albion. I have really been enjoying a lot of the references to the old franchise too. It would have been very easy to create a new RPG, slap Fable on it, and have purely the bare minimum for it to be somewhat recognizable. And hell, some reboots don't even do that much. Plenty of reboots don't even acknowledge the old series. This one, however, doesn't seem to let the old games leave my mind. They set the game in Albion, which is a great start. They showcase the Heroes Guild, which I was really excited about. That's a classic Fable thing. Then they bring back some key locations like Bowerstone. And it just has me wondering, what else will they be bringing back in this reboot? And I do feel that this is the best approach for making a reboot. Not only are you going to please the older fans, but you'll have a pretty clear vision of what the game is supposed to be. And when you ground yourself somewhat in the older game's laws, you know that nothing is going to be too off base. At the end of the day, you can't disappoint fans by bringing back what they already loved. That is, of course, as long as you carve your own style into it and make it its own thing. Now, when it comes to humour, I'm a little bit mixed. Some of the humour does seem to be a bit off base, but I also think it does retain some of the classic Fable humour too. For example, when that classic gag of kicking a chicken is still in the reboot, which I'll be honest is something I wasn't expecting, I can't lie, I was so excited to see. I was like, okay, they are going to be going a bit more classic with Fable's humour. This is what we kind of liked from the older games. But to be honest, it wasn't something I'd expect, because I don't think the marketing has done a great job of showcasing all the humour and tone of the game in general. That's something I'm going to be touching on towards the back end of the video when I do my negative portion. But overall, I have to say, I've been enjoying a lot of the wit and humour of the game, and I do like that they've brought back comedians and celebrities. That's something the older games used to do as well, and I really liked it for that. So whilst I'm not entirely sold on the humour, I've liked bits of what I've seen. And the final major good point I want to touch on here is that in the latest trailer, it was nice to see them put a bit of weight on the choices the heroes will make. It was nice to see them direct a little bit of attention to the fact that this is an RPG, and the decisions you make will impact the world around you. This, of course, is something that is a staple of the Fable IP. And if decision making was absent in Fable, then this game isn't Fable. So whilst they weren't very clear about the exact freedoms and liberties we'd have as the player, I did like the fact that they at least acknowledged some of the choices the player will be making. So to me, these are all the major points that I think are working in Fable's favour so far. And it's not like they're small points at all. These are very important things to the Fable formula. So I'm at least happy to say that the trailers so far are making me feel pretty happy in regards to the features I mentioned. However, I do feel I have an equal amount of concerns, and I need to split the slightly negative portion of this video into two parts. The first part is going to be the things I don't like that I've actually seen, and then the next part is going to be the things I feel like they're avoiding showing us or haven't shown us anything about so far. As with Fable, I feel the biggest concern overall is the amount of unknowns about where this game is going. But first, let's start about the things I don't like about Fable so far that they've actually shown us. I'm already not a big fan of the marketing style they've employed for this game. They seem to be doing this weird documentary style of trailer system, and I've got to say, I don't think it's very good. It comes off as a little too cheesy, even by Fable standards, and it almost seems like they're trying to make a parody of what Fable was. Fable was always goofy, but it kinda took itself seriously when it mattered, and I feel like when you're talking about the story of a game and marketing a game and trying to set the foundations of what Fable is, well, that's when I'd want them to drop the overly goofy style and kinda show us what Fable is. I want to see the content, I want to see the approach you're taking to the story, I want to see the actual dark moments of Fable. When it's just wisecracking and trying to be funny, it makes me wonder if the entire game's going to have this approach, and I'm really hoping not. Now, as I say, I'm glad they brought a ton of comedians, but I would say as a whole the marketing approach is just really off point. Every trailer so far has a ton of action shots and intense moments, and man does it have some pretty scenery as I've mentioned, but I also don't think there's much of any substance, and this to me is a major red flag. And I'd also say that the humour style they're using in the trailers, I'm hoping it's not the humour style they'll be using in the game, as I don't think that the humour they're using is totally landing with the Fable audience. And it's not that I don't find any of the stuff they're doing funny, but I feel like Fable has always had this very crude humour to it. I don't want to call it edgy because I don't think that that's exactly what it is, but there was always this sort of dark humour approach, this underlying darkness to the story, and to the game in general. Like, I don't know any other game, for example, that would let you have a bit about eating live chickens to enter a temple of cultists. Whereas the stuff we're seeing in the trailers just feels too goofy. And like Fable has goofy humour, but I don't feel it was the forefront of Fable's humour. But of course this is just marketing, but going off what I've seen so far, I'm not fully sold on the humour of Fable yet. But for me, the biggest issue I have with the current marketing approach of Fable is the lack of Fable's identity in key areas. One of the biggest things that Fable had going for it back in the day was the morality system. It was something that was the forefront of the IP, a lot of the marketing, and even the box art of some games. Like, whenever there was a chance to market Fable, they marketed that good versus evil approach. That is completely absent so far from this game's identity and marketing. There is not one clip of the player having to choose between a good or bad option. There is not one clip of the player turning evil and having their physical appearance altered. And I consider these pretty big red flags, because if you don't have these in a Fable game, well, that's Fable, that's its identity. Fable's dead. That would just make this another RPG. Until I see a real focus on morality, I'm always going to be a bit iffy about this game, because to me, that's the core foundation Fable is built upon. It felt like the game was built around the morality of the game. Now, let's go back to character models. It's quite funny because I bet everyone's expecting me to talk about the ugly main protag, but actually, I have no problem with this. That's going to be a hot take, I know, but this to me is kind of how I remember Fable always being. I remember Fable 2's character was ugly as hell, and it was just the way it was. And I almost kind of feel it's part of the charm of Fable. I don't want my main protags to look super pretty because, well, this is Fable. I don't need to be beautiful and benevolent. Like, no, I want to be in the slums of Bowerstone doing fart gags. But of course, this is just my opinion and not everyone's going to agree, but there is one thing about the facial models that is slightly concerning me, and that's the overly realistic style of facial models. I never felt any of the older Fable games were going for a realistic look, whereas this new Fable, it's definitely going for that. Now, I'm going to count this as a negative, but I'm not entirely against it, I'm just not sold on it. It looks weird, and it definitely doesn't look like Fable 100% to me, but I'm okay with it. Because at the end of the day, this is a reboot made by a new team. They're going to want to make their own creative choices. So this approach to art style and direction, I'm not against it, I'm just a little nervous and want to see where it goes. So whilst this is a minor red flag, once they prove themselves that they can execute a game in this style and it still feel like Fable, I'd be happy with it. But the final major red flag for me is going to be the consistent delays we've had so far. I mean, the game was supposed to come out in 2025, which already has been many years after the initial showcase. And then it gets delayed to 2026, and I'm like, okay, that sucks, but it's fine, let them work on the game. Only for now, rumours to be floating around that Fable's going to be delayed to 2027. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, because Fable is genuinely my favourite franchise of all time, but I'm really concerned. I understand that a delayed game can eventually be good, but at the end of the day, when there's this many delays, it's a clear sign that something's wrong. Now, I would love for this to be a case where it's just that they marketed the game too early, they set the release date too early, and they're going to have to push it back a few years, not because anything's going wrong, but just because development's a little harder than they expected and games take longer to come out these days, and hell, they're just going a little slow with it. What I'm really hoping is that this isn't a game that's in development hell, going through a bunch of hurdles and they're struggling to get the game out, struggling to find an identity for the game, struggling to get all the features people want. What I'm hoping is that this is just a case of the developers want to take their time and not mess it up, and not a case of the developers are losing their shit making this game and have no idea where to go from here. I really hope that Fable's delays aren't the biggest red flag so far. I really hope that the delays Fable are having will be resolved and the game will come out and be good. But I suppose it's kind of positive that I can say those are all the major red flags for me. I feel like the rest of Fable's concerns for myself come down to what we actually don't know yet. But unfortunately, that's a large majority of things about this game. So let's start with the one everyone wants me to talk about, and the one I want to talk about, which is character creator / selector. Now, I think it's important to remember that Fable never had an option to create a character. Not that I wouldn't want one, but let's remember it never had one. It was always choose between two character templates and customize to your liking. You didn't make it from scratch, you chose from templates. Now I'm hoping that this is how the new Fable is going to be, because regardless of your own biases towards the current player model they're showing off, whether you want to play as a female or male or whatever, removing options to the player is lame. I don't care whether it lets me be a male protag only or a female protag only. Both are lame if the other protag isn't an option. My issue isn't the fact that they're only showing off a female player model, it's the fact that there's not the option so far. At least they haven't shown us the option, and I'd be just as annoyed if it was a male protag. With it being an RPG, I feel like one of the sole responsibilities of that genre of game is letting the player get immersed in the role they are playing, hence, role-playing game. And if they can't let us choose such a core option, that's really kind of lame, especially when that option was present in prior Fable games. And speaking of which, I'm really disappointed that we haven't seen any sort of armor types yet, or character customization in general. Like aside from the initial selector, no hairstyles, no tattoos, no clothing options. I'm sure they're gonna be there, like, please be there, but why are we not being shown them? And I feel that one of the bigger red flags about this is the fact that we have been complaining about it, and they are yet to show it. Surely, if people are complaining about something in the game not being there, and you've got it in the game, then you're like, hey, don't worry, this is in the game, we just haven't shown it yet. I mean, even the latest Saints Row game came out and said, don't worry, you can customize your player, when people were complaining about the player model of the default boss. When you are losing key marketing points and fan reception to the Saints Row reboot, for Christ's sake, we're in trouble. Of course, I don't think Fable's looking anywhere near as bad as that game. Another major concern for me is the pure lack of landlord systems that we've seen so far. In fact, let's also include family systems in that too. One of the best parts about Fable for me was having my own family, buying my own property, renting out other properties around the map to make myself some casual passive income. I liked customizing my house to my liking and letting my house kind of feel lived in with my own family. This is one of those things that really adds to the world building of the game, and the fact that we have been shown none of this so far is really worrying to me. If we genuinely don't have any of those elements in the game, then it's not going to feel like Fable. And I really thought they'd have shown off something by now regarding it. One thing I'm also really concerned may not be in the game, and it's in a similar sort of vein to what I just mentioned, was the renown system. Now, to give a bit of a green flag towards this, I have seen some world interaction regarding the hero. Plenty of people do react to the hero doing certain actions, and that's great. That is something I want desperately, and that's something I loved about Fable 2 specifically, but I haven't seen a great deal of stuff like fame being in the game, or hatred towards the player being in the game. I've seen a couple quotes that could be alluding to it, and I've got to be honest, the marketing seems to do that a lot. A few things in the trailer seem like they're trying to allude to a feature, but they never outright show us or directly tell us it's in the game. For example, they hinted at relationships in one of the trailers, talking about the chances of Albion. And I still don't know whether that means there's going to be relationships in the game, or whether they're just talking about a random side quest. I genuinely don't know, but with any luck, they will have a system where the world completely interacts with you just like they did in Fable 1, 2, and 3. And I hope that the actions you make will hopefully shape the world around you. That was the core of Fable after all. This is a smaller point, but in the gameplay we've been shown, we haven't seen any chests or silver keys, gargoyles or gnomes, or even demon doors. These small side factors of the world are things I truly find charming about the original Fable series, and they really add to the game's exploration. So I'm hoping at some point we'll get some footage of these things being in the game, and maybe the open world exploration will start to feel a bit more like Fable. Only time will tell though. This one is a lesser issue for me personally, but I haven't seen Playground Games prove themselves as competent RPG makers. Obviously at this point it's quite hard to expect them to, with Fable being their first RPG. But considering all the delays and the rumours of development hell, I'm still quite nervous about their actual ability regarding the game. That being said, the recent gameplay we got from them seems to have me a little bit back on board. I do like how it's looking, and I do think they understand the fundamentals, but I'm still wondering if they'll actually be able to execute the finer details of Fable. And I'm praying that their inexperience with RPG games won't hold them back. But on the flip side, I'm happy these guys are getting a chance to prove themselves, and hopefully Fable will be the game where they can do so. As you can tell, there's plenty of questions I'm wondering about this game out of fear. But at the same time, there's plenty of questions I'm wondering about Fable in a more positive sense. Like, for example, it's now confirmed that Albion, the Heroes Guild, and suspectedly Bowerstone are returning to the series. Which had me wondering, are we going to be revisiting a lore-accurate version of Albion? Will we see Bower Lake, Westcliff, Bloodstone, Oakfield? I'll be honest, all these questions get me very excited as my inner Fable fan dreams of exploring these glorious locations once more. I genuinely may tear up if I get to explore the world I have called home for nearly 2 decades again, for the first time. I'm also super excited about what lore will exist from the prior games. I know that the old games were made by a different team and different writers, but there's a small part of me that would just love to see what this team thinks about Teresa, for example, and her true intentions. You know, why was she messing with world events? Or maybe how they feel about the Shadow Court and what happened with Reaver regarding them. Or maybe if stuff like the events of Oakvale are still canon. I'm super excited to see how much the team focuses on the old lore, and if they're right in the reboot with the old lore of Fable, or if they're just going to be scrapping the events of games prior to this new one. I'm not against or for either one. Both a brand new lore would be awesome, but old lore would give me so much nostalgia. Let's just hope that either way there's an Easter egg or two for us true fans. And this applies for characters too. We've only seen a few new characters so far, but I'm hoping for a couple returning ones. I know that only time will tell, but Teresa and Reaver have to be coming back. I'm also super excited to try out the game's new horse mechanics. They never had them in the mainline games outside of carriages. I'm super curious to see if it's the only mode of transport. Should we be expecting boats and such? I'm very curious and excited about it. And I think them having horses also tells us that the map isn't going to be split into segments like the prior games, as of course the map has to be large enough that traversing via horse makes sense. So it looks like we're going to be getting a fully open world map opposed to having section maps like Fable 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to wrap it up here because I feel like I've been going on for a while, but it's a really weird feeling being both nervous and excited for something at the same time. Fable is such an important IP for me. My earliest memories of gaming started with Fable 2. Being a kid and exploring what I consider to be a near perfect game, to venture into that world and fall so in love with it, I decided to spend the next decade plus invested in the hobby. I'm not expecting the new Fable to live up to that. I simply don't think it's possible for a game to give me the experience I had with Fable 2, or any of the other Fable games for that matter. They are just genuinely that special to me, and they shaped so much of my gaming journey. But what I do want is this game to live up to the legacy of its own franchise, to try and retain some of the identity, but also innovate in new and expansive ways. I guess I just want Fable to do Fable some justice. If they do Fable right, it could well become one of my favorite games of all time. If they do Fable wrong, I will feel betrayed beyond belief. This 5-year plus wait for this game has been painful, and it's been made only more painful by consistent delays and terrifying unknowns. Only time will tell if Fable has a chance to become legendary once again, but as someone who truly loves these games and cares about them deeply, I really hope the best for this game. Please don't mess up Fable.